My son called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and I remember it was Tuesday because I had just gotten back from my water aerobics class at the Y, and my hair was still damp, and I was standing in the kitchen making myself a cup of tea. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk about the housewarming. His name is Owen. He'll be 34 in November." I said, "Of course, sweetheart. What do you mean?" And he said, and I want you to hear this the way I heard it, standing in my kitchen in my damp hair. He said, "We're thinking it might be better if you came by after. Like, after the party winds down. Around 9 or so." I didn't say anything for a moment. I thought I had misheard him. "After?" I said. "It's just, Melissa has a whole vision for the afternoon and she wants it to feel a certain way. And you know how you and her mother don't always?" He trailed off. "It's just easier, Mom. You understand." I said yes. I told him I understood. I said yes. I told him I understood. And then I hung up the phone and stood there looking at my tea, and I thought about the down payment I'd wired to his account 11 months earlier. $42,000. Every penny of my late husband's life insurance that I had managed not to spend in the 2 years since he passed. I had given it to Owen and Melissa without them even having to ask twice. I want to tell you about Owen first, because I think you need to know who he was before he became who he is now. He grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Akron, Ohio. Nothing fancy. His father, my husband, worked for the county roads department for 31 years. I worked part-time at a pediatric dentist's office, scheduling appointments, filing insurance claims, answering phones. We weren't poor, but we watched every dollar. We clipped coupons on Sunday mornings. We drove our cars until the wheels practically fell off. We took one real vacation, Myrtle Beach, the summer Owen was 12, and we talked about it for years afterward like it was Paris. Owen was a good kid. I don't say that to excuse what happened later. I say it because it's true, and because it makes what happened later harder to understand, not easier. He was gentle. He helped his father rake leaves without being asked. He called me every Sunday his first year of college, even when his friends were heading out and he probably had better things to do. He said, "I just wanted to check on you, Mom. I used to tell my friend Paulette she's been my best friend since we were both 26. I used to say, that boy is going to make some woman very happy someday. Then he met Melissa. I want to be fair. I genuinely do. Melissa is not a bad person. She's just a person who grew up differently than we did. Her family has a lake house in Michigan. Her father is an orthodontist, and her mother never worked a day outside the home. When Owen brought her home for Thanksgiving the first time, she looked at my kitchen the way you might look at a map of a country you'd never planned to visit. Polite. Detached. I noticed. But I told myself it didn't matter. When Owen proposed to her, I cried happy tears. I offered to help with the wedding however I could. I asked Melissa's mother, Renee, what I might contribute. She said very sweetly, very carefully, "We'll let you know." They never let me know. I showed up to the wedding having paid for my own dress, my own hotel room, my own flight to Charleston where they decided to get married, and I sat in the 3rd row because the first 2 rows on the groom's side were taken up by Renee's extended family, people I had never met, people who apparently mattered more to the seating chart than the woman who had raised the groom. I smiled through all of it. That is what we do, those of us who love our children more than we love our pride. That was 3 years ago. In the time since, I have helped them in ways I am almost embarrassed to count. The down payment, yes. But also I flew to Columbus. They'd moved to Columbus for Melissa's job. I flew there twice to help them pack and unpack when they moved apartments. I watched their dog, a large and poorly behaved golden retriever named Biscuit, for 3 weeks when they went to Italy for their anniversary. I sent a check for $800 when Melissa's car needed a new transmission, because Owen called me sounding stressed and I couldn't stand to hear him sound that way. I babysat the dog again. I painted their guest bedroom because Melissa mentioned offhandedly that she loved the color of my living room, and Owen called later to ask if I'd be willing, and I was. So I drove 6 hours with a trunk full of painting supplies and spent a weekend on my knees on their hardwood floor getting the edges right. I did these things because I love my son. I also did them, if I'm being honest, because I believed they were building something That one day Owen and I would sit on the back porch of that house and drink coffee together, and it would feel like family. I believed I was making deposits into something. I didn't understand yet that I was the only one making deposits. The house was in Bexley, a suburb east of Columbus. Owen had texted me photos when they first put in the offer. High ceilings, a big backyard, a little office where he could work from home. I had texted back a string of heart emojis like some kind of grandmother, which I suppose I still hope to be someday. I was genuinely thrilled for them. I did not once think, when they have this housewarming, I wonder if I'll be invited. The party was on a Saturday in September. I know it was September because the trees were just starting to turn, and I remember thinking as I drove the 6 hours to Columbus that Ohio in early fall is actually beautiful if you pay attention. I had brought a hostess gift, a cast-iron Dutch oven from Le Creuset that I had bought specifically because Melissa had mentioned once in passing, that she wanted one. It was $160. I had wrapped it in craft paper and tied it with a ribbon. Owen's instructions were to park on the street and text him when I arrived. He would come out and get me. The party started at 2. He had told me to come at 9. I parked my car on Elmwood Avenue at 9:15. I texted him. I sat there. The lights in the house were warm and golden. Through the front windows, I could see people moving around inside. I could hear music faintly through my car window. Something with a beat. Someone laughed loudly. And then someone else laughed. And then it was quiet again. I sat there for 25 minutes before Owen came out. He was wearing a flannel shirt I had never seen before, and I have to tell you, he looked happy. His cheeks were pink from the party, and he was smiling when he came down the front walk. And for just a moment, one small, embarrassing moment, I thought, he's happy to see me. He missed me. He opened my car door and said, "Hey, Mom. Sorry, things ran a little long." I got out of the car. I hugged him. He hugged me back briefly, the way you hug someone you've just run into at the grocery store. "Come on in," he said. "A few people are still here." A few people. I had driven 6 hours to be included among a few people still here. The house was beautiful. I will give them that. Melissa had decorated it the way you see in magazines. Neutral tones, lots of linen, a gallery wall in the hallway done with a level and a measuring tape, everything perfectly straight. I stood in the entryway holding my wrapped Dutch oven, and I looked at that gallery wall, and I noticed there were no photos of Owen's family, none of his father, none of me. There were photos of Owen and Melissa on their wedding day, photos of Owen and Melissa in Italy, photos that I assumed were Melissa's family at the lake house, a group of blonde adults squinting into the sun. The wall told a story. I wasn't in it. Melissa came over and kissed me on the cheek. She said, "So glad you could make it," the way you say that to someone who has driven past your house and stopped to drop something off. She took the Dutch oven and said, "Oh, how thoughtful," and set it on the kitchen counter without unwrapping it. I stayed for 45 minutes. Owen showed me the backyard and the office. I admired things. I made conversation with a couple I had never met, friends of Melissa's from her college days, and I talked about the drive and the fall leaves, and I laughed at things that were only mildly funny. I drank a glass of wine that someone handed me, and I stood in my son's beautiful kitchen, and I thought, is this it? Is this what I drove 6 hours for? To be let in after the party, like someone checking that the caterers cleaned up properly? I said goodbye at 10. Owen walked me to my car. He said, "Thanks for making the trip, Mom. I know it's a haul." I said, "Of course." He said, "Safe drive home." I said, "Tell Melissa the house is beautiful." He said, "Will do." And that was it. No mention of when we might see each other next. No hug that lasted more than 2 seconds. No hug that lasted more than 2 seconds. No acknowledgement that anything about the evening was unusual. I drove to the Holiday Inn on Broad Street. I had booked a room because I hadn't planned to drive home at 10 at night, and I sat on the edge of the bed in my coat, and I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would cry. Instead, I just felt very still and very clear, the way the air feels right after a storm has passed. I thought about my husband. He had been gone 2 years and 4 months by then, and I still sometimes had whole conversations with him in my head. I thought about what he would say. I knew what he would say. He would say, "Marlene, my name is Marlene." He would say, "Marlene, that boy was raised better than this." And then he would probably get quiet, because that's what he did when he was sad, and I would know without him saying it that his heart was breaking the same way mine was. I ordered room service and ate a BLT on the edge of the bed and watched 2 hours of home renovation shows and went to sleep. On the drive home the next morning, something shifted in me. I'm not sure I can explain it except to say that I had been driving towards something for a long time, and I finally admitted to myself that there was nothing there. When you've been giving and the person you love keeps holding the door just barely open, just enough that you keep believing you can get inside, at some point you have to stop. Not out of anger, out of honesty. I called Paulette from the car on my Bluetooth. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Marlene, how long are you going to let this go on?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "I think you do know." I drove the rest of the way home in silence, thinking about the gallery wall. The following week, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my financial advisor. His name is Terry, and he has a kind, no-nonsense way of explaining things that I appreciate. I told him I wanted to rethink my estate planning. I told him I was considering redirecting a significant portion of what I had previously intended to leave to Owen toward charitable giving, specifically a literacy organization in Akron that I had volunteered with years ago, and my church's building fund. Terry did not ask me why. He just said, "We can absolutely do that. Do you want to schedule a time to come in?" The second call was harder. I called Owen. He answered on the third ring. He sounded distracted, like he was doing something else at the same time. I said, "I wanted to talk to you about something." He said, "Sure, Mom, what's up?" I said, "Going forward, I'm not going to be able to help financially the way I have been. The gift I made for your down payment, I want you to know I gave that freely, and I don't regret it. But there won't be more. I need to be responsible with what I have for my own future." Silence. Then he said, "Is everything okay? Are you having money problems?" I said, "No, I'm being proactive." Another silence. Then, "Okay. I mean, we weren't counting on anything." That last sentence. I let it sit there. I didn't argue with it. We both knew it wasn't entirely true. I said, "I love you, Owen." He said, "Love you too, Mom." We hung up. I won't pretend that conversation fixed anything. It didn't. But it was the first time in a long time that I had said something that was entirely mine, not shaped by what he needed, not softened for his comfort, not given away freely in hopes it would make him turn toward me a little more. The months that followed were, I want to be accurate here, they were lonely sometimes. I'm not going to dress it up. I am 67 years old, and I live alone in a house that has 3 bedrooms, and I sometimes walk past Owen's old room and feel the particular kind of sadness that has no name, but that I think every mother of a grown child knows. The holidays were hard. Thanksgiving, I went to Paulette's. Christmas, I drove to my sister Doreen's in Pittsburgh, and we watched old movies and ate too much, and it was actually fine. It was more than fine. It was warm in a way I had stopped expecting. In January, I signed up for a watercolor class at the Community Arts Center. I know that sounds small, but I had always wanted to learn, and I had always talked myself out of it for reasons that seemed practical but were actually just fear. I showed up on a Thursday evening not knowing anyone, and I sat down next to a woman named Bet, who was 81 years old, and had the kind of laugh that fills a whole room, and I thought, why did I wait so long? In February, Paulette and I booked a trip to Portugal. Neither of us had ever been. We fly out in April. I bought a new suitcase. It's a deep teal color, and I think it is the most beautiful thing I own. Owen called me in March. He sounded different. Not distressed exactly, but quieter. He asked how I was doing and actually waited for the answer. I told him about the watercolor class, and he said, "That's great, Mom, really." And I believed him. After a minute, he said, "I've been thinking about the housewarming." I waited. He said, "I think we handled that badly." I said, "I appreciate you saying that." He said, "Melissa and I have been talking about a lot of things." He paused. I think I've been. I think I let some things go too far. And I don't have a good reason for it. I just wanted you to know that I know. I have thought about what to say next about 10,000 times in the months since that conversation. I know what I was supposed to say. I know the script. You're supposed to say, water under the bridge, sweetheart, and make it easy, and let everybody off the hook, and go back to being the mother who drives 6 hours to paint a guest bedroom and sits outside in the dark, waiting to be let in. I didn't say that. I said, I love you, Owen. That will never change. But I need things to be different between us. I need to feel like your mother, not a service provider. And I think that's going to take some time and some real changes, not just one phone call. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, yeah, okay, that's fair. We've talked 3 times since then. Real conversations, not the ones where he's doing something else while I'm talking. Last month he called to tell me about a problem at work, and I realized halfway through that he was actually asking for my advice. I don't know if that means things are fixed. I genuinely don't know. I think there are years of habits between us that don't change in a season, and I think Melissa is a part of the story that hasn't been fully written yet, but I am not sitting outside in the dark anymore. That I can tell you for certain. I told Paulette about the call from Owen, the one in March, and she listened to the whole thing and then she said, so what happens now? I said. I don't know, but I'm going to Portugal in April. She laughed, and I laughed, and outside my kitchen window, the maple tree was just starting to bud. That pale green that only lasts about a week before it deepens into real summer green. And I stood there looking at it, and I thought about my husband, and I thought about Owen, and I thought about the woman I was the night I sat on the edge of that hotel bed eating a BLT in my coat. She was someone who had forgotten, for a little while, that she mattered too. I hadn't forgotten anymore. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that September night, not in a dramatic way, just quietly the way you do when you're driving a long stretch of highway and there's nothing to look at but road. What I gave Owen over the years, the money, the weekends, the painted walls, the dog sitting, the flights I booked on short notice because he called and sounded stressed. I gave all of it freely. I want to be clear about that. Nobody held a gun to my head. I made choices, and my choices had consequences. And one of the consequences was that Owen learned, slowly, without either of us noticing, that I would always be there no matter what, that there was no cost to leaving me outside, that the door could stay mostly closed and I would keep knocking gently, bringing gifts, making it easy. That's not his fault entirely. That's mine. I taught him that lesson one Tuesday afternoon at a time, one check written, one 6-hour drive taken without being asked if it was convenient for me. There's something I've come to believe, not because anyone told me, just because I've lived long enough to watch it play out, and it's this. The way you allow people to treat you is a kind of instruction. You are always teaching the people around you what you will and won't accept. And when you accept things quietly, when you swallow the hurt and show up anyway, you are not being selfless. You are being unclear. And unclear kindness is one of the most confusing things you can offer another person, because they never have to reckon with what they're actually doing. I don't say that to be hard on myself. I say it because understanding it changed something in me. When I told Owen that things needed to be different, that I needed to feel like his mother and not a service provider, I wasn't punishing him. I was finally being honest. Maybe for the first time in years. And honesty, even when it arrives late, has a way of cutting through the noise in a way that nothing else can. Owen went quiet on the phone. And in that quiet, I think something real happened between us. Not fixed, but real. The intelligence I'm talking about isn't book intelligence. It's the kind that comes from paying attention to your own life, from noticing patterns, from asking yourself hard questions, from being willing to change direction even when you've been going the same way for a long time. I was 66 years old before I sat in a hotel room in Columbus and finally asked myself, what am I doing and is it working? That question was late, but it wasn't too late. And the courage, because it does take courage, I won't pretend it doesn't. The courage wasn't in the big dramatic moment. It wasn't the phone call to Terry or the conversation with Owen. It was the smaller thing, deciding that I was worth being honest about, deciding that a woman who raised a good son, who worked for 30 years, who loved her husband and her friends and her life, deserved to be inside the party, not waiting in the car. I'm going to Portugal in April. I have a teal suitcase and a good friend and a watercolor class on Thursday evenings, and I am, for the first time in a long time, genuinely curious about what comes next. That's not a small thing. That's everything.